Hello and welcome to the Redmen TV. In this mad lockdown that we are in, we are still sponsored by The Athletic, and I've got a great show lined up for you today. This is taken from a Redmen TV subscriber show. It's evergreen content. It's absolutely brilliant. It's me and James Pearce, The Athletic journalist, and of course, if you still want your football news, The Athletic is still doing the business. So for a 7-day free trial and 50% off your yearly subscription, go to theathletic.co.uk/Redmen TV to get that. There's a whole host of wonderful articles being put up there daily, not just by the Liverpool lads, but by some of the greatest writers in the UK. But as I mentioned, this show is me and James Pearce, and we talk about the rise and fall of Brendan Rodgers.
I think the great thing with Klopp is, he is this great, he has big power at the club, quite rightly so because of what he's achieved, but he's not a control freak. He's not someone that wants it to be all about him. He surrounds himself by really, really good people. Yeah. And some people in his position would maybe see having really good people around him as some kind of threat, or you want yes men or whatever, but he's never been like that.
Well, let's draw the parallels to the Brendan Rodgers stuff, because I think it actually all ties in rather nicely, really, is that there's so many stories there of like him not maybe pulling away from Gerrard and Carragher, because you can speculate on that, but the feeling was that Brendan didn't maybe handle those guys with the big reputations who had maybe a bit more power or stature or whatever at the club than him. Whereas Jurgen Klopp, I think the peace of mind of being a long-term thing or having that long-term contract has allowed him to kind of develop the players and what have you. But you see it all the time with managers, don't you? They don't refresh around them, and that might have been a fear with Klopp to some extent. But since Buvac has moved on, obviously Pepijn Lijnders has come in. Now he's talking about bringing Matos in as filling his previous role and what have you. Is that another part of how Liverpool have developed this stability? Because obviously Brendan Rodgers, maybe it was in terms of his contract or his role at the club, I don't know, but maybe a personal insecurity kind of hampered Liverpool's long-term planning.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of that. I think I kind of had to remind myself this week when I was doing the stuff on Rodgers that he was 39 when he took over as Liverpool manager, and that's why I've got, when people say, oh, he was arrogant, or he put on a bit of a front or whatever, and I was thinking, God, you know what? To come into a club as big as Liverpool when he didn't have a glistening CV that immediately commanded respect. There's a lot of people that A, didn't want Kenny to go in the first place, or B, wanted Benitez back, or C, wanted a manager with of a higher caliber than Rodgers in terms of what he'd achieved in the game already. So I've always got sympathy for Rodgers in terms of people saying, oh, he was too full of himself. So I was thinking, well, he had to, if he'd come in as some shrinking violet, I think he'd have been eaten alive in a job as big as Liverpool. But I think the knock-on effect of that was there was always this trust issue. I think you see that probably best in there was always friction. It was well documented over the years in terms of with Rodgers and the transfer committee, and with Michael Edwards, and you contrast that to the fantastic relationship Klopp has with Michael Edwards. That I think where Rodgers maybe saw that as a threat, and don't you tell me, I'll tell you who we want, don't you tell me who you think we, and Klopp is very much, oh, tell me about that player, why, and I think that's one of his big strengths is being in, rather than seeing that as like someone sticking their business and a threat to his authority, and look, I'm the main man.
Have you watched the Moneyball or Red Moneyball? Like, there's so many similarities in that, and with what Billy Beane does with the Oakland days, in the early stages when it's not working, and he has to double down, and he maybe puts the manager, under the GM under more and more pressure. It felt a little bit like that looking at Rodgers. He's obviously doubling down and probably digging himself in a little bit more than he would, because he clearly felt under pressure, particularly with the transfer stuff, and it led to some really disjointed thinking, I think, in how that squad was constructed.
Yeah, and it was almost like an uneasy compromise and like a bit of a marriage of convenience from the start, wasn't it? With Liverpool were dead set on having this structure with a young coach, sporting director, yet completely ditched that because Rodgers said he wasn't prepared to work in that structure. Then they created the transfer committee, which obviously Rodgers at the time would have felt, that's a triumph for me, no sporting director, I'm the main man. But then suddenly you had this situation which didn't really, neither the owners or Rodgers really got what they wanted. And then Probably what didn't help Rodgers was when they did back him in that first summer with, at the time, what was big money to Liverpool for Barini and Joe Allen.
Yeah.
And then when they, when clearly they don't give you a return on that investment, it's bound to then go, well, sorry, Brendan, but we're not going to back you on, Ashley Williams or Ryan Bertrand when all the the data and the analysis is telling us something different. So yeah, I think that trust was always an issue there, but just right from the start, it's just not been an issue under Klopp. And in terms of when it comes to Klopp appreciating the input of good people around him, I think probably Pep Lijnders is kind of the epitome of that. A guy that Rodgers didn't even the Klopp didn't even know before he came in.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people would have just gone, see you later. You're not my man, kind of thing. But it's in Klopp's nature to give people a chance. He'd obviously heard fantastic things about Pep Lijnders and his coaching and knowledge of the game, and and in terms of his kind of standing at the club, it's just absolutely rocketed. I think that's underlined by how quickly Klopp moved to get him back. He completely understood why he wanted to go to Holland and have that stint managing. It didn't work out for him, and he ended up inviting him over to Kiev for the Champions League final, and not only offering him his old job back, but essentially offering him more responsibility, and that's grown and grown. Obviously now to a point where it's just not realistic for Pep Lijnders to be that kind of key link between the academy and the first team, which he's kind of been handling that plus assistant manager, and that's obviously led to Vitor Matos coming in from Porto. But yeah, I think you speak to the players and they all rave about Pep Lijnders. It's the quality of the training sessions he puts on. Just I think you only had to see him do the press conference at MK Dons to see he's such an engaging guy. I don't think
that was the most interesting pre-match press conference I've ever watched ever. And I mean, look, I'm sure you've watched. Well, you've watched damn more press conferences than I have. I'm certain of it down over the last decade. He was engaging. He was insightful. Klopp's always good value, isn't he, in press conferences? But that in terms of Pep, because it came out of nothing. It came out of nowhere. I had no expectations of him. I had no real idea of how he would conduct himself. But I think it's telling just how mature, how well he spoke, how enthusiastically he spoke was really contagious.
Yeah. I think he probably would have been a little bit nervous before doing that, just because the first press conference he's done. I mean, he has done a fair few interviews. I've interviewed him a few times, and I've always come away thinking, I always come away thinking, well, I thought I loved football, but this fella's this fella's on a whole different level. It's just his passion for the job, and his knowledge is just absolutely ridiculous. I think you speak to people and he's like an absolute sponge in terms of absorbing information and having the knack of not overcomplicating things with players. He's not one of those coaches that sounds like he's swallowed a manual. He picks the right things, from analysis to give the players just enough rather than overburden them with information. He's a huge asset to the club. And it'll be interesting. Obviously people will wonder whether he is being groomed for maybe a bigger role further down the line. I'm not sure. I think he's certainly valued absolutely immensely, but whether he had that short stint obviously in Holland, which didn't work out great for him, and I'm sure he'd be even better for the experience of that. But Liverpool are just very lucky to have someone like him on board.
I think it made people feel a lot calmer, because we've seen a lot of this stuff of in recent weeks, Klopp's not looking to extend his contract. He might take a sabbatical. He might do this and this, and I think a lot of it is just everyone loves a bit of fear, don't they? You know what I mean? Particularly people outside of the football club or fans of other clubs, or journalists with different backgrounds and what have you. But whether he ends up being the next Liverpool manager, it made everyone feel a little bit more like, oh well, if we had to. No, because Steve, I think everyone, Klopp even referenced Steven Gerrard himself the other week. I think Gerrard is the one that everyone would have, if without having to look at whether he's a good manager or not, or looking at stats or anything, any metrics. Gerrard is the obvious candidate, just because he's Steven Gerrard and he is currently a manager. But whether you can bridge straight from Rangers into Liverpool is obviously going to be the big concern there. But whether Lijnders can go from second division, Dutch side failure to being Liverpool manager is probably a bigger jump. But if the thought of you could maybe get some continuity, so it just, I say, nothing to be seen in the here and now.
Yeah.
But it did at least. It raised the question or the possibilities, I guess, which is something.
And I think the stuff about Klopp being hamstrung without Bovac seems to have gone quite quiet.
Honestly, Jay, so I wrote a book about last year and it was the first half of the season. It was this spell last season when we were drawing a lot of games, and the amount of times that it's since Bovac is gone, it's all gone to hell, etc., etc. Yeah, it's funny how things change. I want to just jump back to some of the Rodgers stuff because I think so much of it is so interesting. I don't want to, I want to come on to where he is as a man now, really, because I think it's important. But I don't want to feel like we're digging him out or going too much into maybe his failings or saying that he wasn't a good manager, because I think he is. I think he's proven that. But go back to that his initial signing. I think the Van Gaal stuff's really interesting because obviously being lined up for director of football. To your knowledge, how close was that? Because it's an alternate universe right now, isn't it? But you think about it, because Van Gaal goes on, he gets the Manchester United job. I still see Man United fans now referring to the Solskjaer appointment at the moment as the dark days of Van Gaal, which I'm sure will seem a lot brighter by comparison, hopefully in the coming weeks. But how close? Would Van Gaal have taken that?
He was definitely keen. Yeah. He was. In the end, it was from Liverpool's side, the fact that it didn't happen, just because Rodgers was absolutely adamant that he wasn't prepared to work in that structure. And I think I remember being told at the time that he'd basically, I think he'd gone for kind of reassurance with the owners 3 times that can you guarantee me that if I do agree to take the job, you will not bring someone in above my head. I'm not, I'm just not prepared to, I need total control. I think Rodgers, I remember him telling me that, he felt as if at the time his kind of one failure was at Reading, and he felt that a big part of that was having to work with the director of football. So almost like he'd been stung by that kind of structure before, and didn't want to go down that road. But I think the ironic thing is probably what Brendan saw as a kind of a triumph. Actually, I actually think it probably would have done him a lot of good having someone more senior there, because
there's a bit of like the David Moyes appointment in that, isn't there? Where I think he was heavily advised at the time to keep on as much of Ferguson's staff as possible, and decided to clean house and make it his own. Whereas Brendan, I guess people probably call it hubris, because I think that's something that's been associated a little bit with Brendan, but I'm not sure if it is hubris as such at that time. Maybe it is a bit of self-preservation, probably, or maybe a bit of fear or something on his side.
I think he probably just wanting to ensure that he could do everything on his terms, and then as it was, he obviously thought that was the way things were going to be, but it quickly became apparent that it wasn't, that he was going to have to, he didn't have a director of football as such, but he was still going to have to work with other people that he would have to convince about certain transfer decisions if they were going to happen. And I think the shame is because Brendan Rodgers, he's clearly now a much better manager 7 years down the line than he was then. I think he'd probably admit himself that he made mistakes when he was at Liverpool, but from the absolute word go at Liverpool, the players loved his sessions. There was never any issues with that. He was incredibly hands-on in terms of being at the heart of all the sessions. The commitment to attacking football and dominating possession, and they absolutely that was his massive strength, being on the training ground. I think where he had issues was the man management side off the club, dealing with star names, big personalities. I think certain players felt as if there was a situation where he was saying one thing to their face, and then what was going on elsewhere didn't really back up that, wasn't being completely honest. and that then created friction. But no, I think one thing that annoys me is I still seen some comments today on the back of the long read on his tenure that myself and Simon Hughes have done, is this idea that 2013-14 was all down to Luis Suarez, because I kind of was going back through that season, putting that piece together, and I mean that was just an absolutely incredible. Obviously we've been spoilt since in terms of what's happened, but I remember doing interviews with kind of Anfield legends, saying we haven't seen football like this since the late 80s.
Yeah.
This is absolutely on a different planet. You think of the Arsenal home game, and
Yeah.
they came to Liverpool as league leaders that day and were 4-0 down in 20 minutes. And
that was one of until Jurgen Klopp came in. I think that was the best performance I've ever seen at Anfield.
Yeah, and even that thrashing Tottenham 5-0 at White Hart Lane and demolishing Everton 4-0 in the derby. I mean, I know Brendan, obviously when things were going badly, some of the things he came out with were used as a stick to beat him with. But one of my favourite quotes he came out with, I remember him kind of lauding it in the Old Trafford press room, having beaten Moyes' team 3-0, and he said, I think one of his quotes was, it was United Stadium, their fans, but it was our ball. And the best thing was Liverpool had about 40% possession that day. So it didn't really even stack up. But
he'd had that one written before the day before probably.
But that and there was so much to admire about that season. I think people accuse him of being tactically naive and all the rest of it. But he that season, the way in which he changed the formation 4-3-3 to 4-4-2 diamond. We had Sterling. It wasn't obviously Suarez was. It was absolutely.
He was arguably the third best player in the world.
Yeah,
at that point,
he was.
Sure.
Some of the things he did that season were just crazy. But Rodgers, he got the best season that Daniel Sturridge ever had out of him. He got. That was really the season where Jordan Henderson's Liverpool career really clicked into gear after
the last Gerrard hurrah.
Yeah, reinventing Gerrard as the kind of deep lying playmaker. You think about the form that John Flanagan produced during that run-in. That was the best football he's ever produced. Martin Skirtle, the best period he's ever had in his career.
He scored 7 goals that season.
Yeah. So it was, that I always think people accuse. I think it's very harsh to say that because of what happened around the Chelsea game. Then there's the accusations of naivety, with too gung ho. Didn't need to go chasing that game, which obviously in hindsight. Was it 7 points in 3 games, and Rodgers would have been the man to bring the Premier League title back to Liverpool. But I've also got a lot of sympathy with the idea, well, hang on a minute, Liverpool had won 11 on the spin. They'd got into that position playing a certain brand of football. If he'd suddenly changed it and gone all cagey and Liverpool had lost, he'd have got absolute pelters for that. Yeah. So
it was a team in the red line by that point, wasn't it? It was like you've just got to put your foot down to the floor and trust that the engine doesn't blow, because there's nothing more you can do to that. Because if you change it, do you lose momentum? Do whatever. I think he talked to the players. I don't think they begrudge it. We spoke to Lucas Leiva a couple of years ago, and he says it's the same. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to come in and rip it all up and change what's got you there for that one game. It would have sat uncomfortably. And it's funny because Klopp actually referenced this before Kiev when he said, what are you going to do? It's Real Madrid. And he was like, am I going to go into the changing room now and go, right lads, all that stuff we've been doing, forget it, because it's Real Madrid. How's that going to, how does that impact the way that the players think about everything you're doing? Yeah, I think you're right. He gets a bad rap. What do you think Brendan Rodgers' legacy is at Liverpool? Because it's a tough one, isn't it? Because he's going to, he's remembered as much for that season as he is for the low points. Obviously, there's the FA Cup against Aston Villa. Yeah. There's the 6-1 drubbing away at Stoke in the last game of the season. Gerrard's last game as a Liverpool player is that game. There's some of the missteps. There's the Joe Allens. There's the being Liverpool quotes. All that kind of stuff. How do you feel he is being remembered, and in probably a little bit more time will be remembered?
Yeah, I think we remembered as helping to develop and bring through good young players. I think he effectively launched the career of Raheem Sterling. I think you look at the career that Jordan Henderson's gone on to have. I mean, I think he showed that he's not completely set in his ways with, Henderson's a good case in point in which he came in and pretty much before he'd even started working with him had decided, he's not for me. I don't think this fella's good enough, and was prepared obviously to offload him to Fulham and get Clint Dempsey the other way, which I think
there are so many comic book writers could have a field day. There could be a Spider-Verse style situation where you go through all the things that if Brendan Rodgers got his way, where would we be today?
Yeah. So but then again, he was also the man that really got Henderson going at Liverpool and gave him the captaincy, which 4 years down the road, he's still the Liverpool captain and a Champions League winning captain. I think he did make mistakes. I think you look at that summer of 2014 and that's essentially what absolutely killed the momentum that Liverpool had, because I think that was that was a collective failure. I wouldn't just pin that on Rodgers. I think there were other mistakes, but
what I thought was interesting, I think Si Hughes puts in the article that, and it's something I'd never known before, because Alexis Sanchez was where all the hopes and dreams were pinned that summer, and there's a bit in there where he talks about Rodgers and Air going over to Brazil, and while Arsene Wenger's basically chasing Alexis Sanchez around the country, they're sat on the beach. Now I know that obviously there'll be a degree of flourish, I guess, to that, because it's a nice image of them two playing beach volleyball around a load of bikini clad ladies, doubtless because we know Ian Air, whilst Arsene Wenger's putting in the hard yards. But I just thought that was a really interesting insight to it. Not all Rodgers isn't entirely culpable, but there's always situations where maybe could more have been.
I think that summer was a car crash, really, in terms of. I remember being there every step of the way during the pre-season, and they'd known that Suarez was gonna go, and the lack of plan in place was alarming. It was, I can understand at the time, missing out on Sanchez. Liverpool were absolutely adamant that Sanchez had told them it was a family decision and he wanted to go to London, but it was more the kind of like. It just seemed like just not a clear plan. I remember Rodgers saying, we're going to go for Wilfred Boney. And Boney's the one. And then kind of 2 days later it was, Boney wants $100,000 a week. That's not, so where'd you go from here? And then it was I think we might go for Benzema. And it was like, how'd you go from Sanchez to Boney to Benzema? It was and then it was is Benzema still a possibility? No, that's not going to happen. Yeah, and it was, and obviously that was the summer as well with Loic Remy coming out. I remember being in Boston and seeing Loic Remy at the hotel, and he'd had his medical, and 3 days later, where's the announcement? And then you find out that he'd failed the medical, and Liverpool felt it was too much of a gamble, and then. It was just ridiculous to the point where
it makes you understand, knowing that, how Liverpool end up with Balotelli.
Yeah, and I mean, I had this conversation with Simon because Simon said to me, "Do you think?" Because I was there on that America tour where Rodgers said, absolutely no chance would we sign Balotelli, and Simon said to me, "Do you think was that him deliberately misleading journalists?" And I said to him, 100% not. I said, I remember speaking to him off the record as well, and him saying, I don't know where that, I genuinely believed him that I remember him saying to me, do you really think I've spent, the last few years building up this dressing room to bring in someone as divisive as him? But it was more kind of the fact that so many other potential targets went by the wayside. That then it reached a point where he was told, you either take Samuel Eto'o or you take Balotelli, and it was Eto'o was about 57 by then, so it was well, I'll take Balotelli, and I still think I think although Rodgers wasn't completely culpable in that, and it was a collective issue, I think also I think there definitely was a little bit of his ego in terms of, if I'm the man who Mancini couldn't do it, Mourinho couldn't do it, but he hasn't worked with me yet, and I remember him saying, I've had 3 hours in the office with Mario and he's promised me, and you're like, do you not think maybe a few others have had the same promises? And then and very quickly, you just thought, God Almighty, the drop off, and Liverpool just completely lost their identity, didn't they? And then I think as things unravelled, he just couldn't. He was always playing catch up then, and with hindsight, the end should have come really in the summer after that Stoke game, because I remember that pre-season tour to the Far East in Australia in 2015, and it wasn't particularly pleasant covering that, because Rodgers by that point had kind of cut off. I used to be able to go down and see him in his office once a week, and that had completely kind of bitten the dust, because he'd felt the coverage was too critical on the back of the 6-1 at Stoke, and it was at one point
he wanted to see the comments in the live stream we were doing for that game.
I should have focused on the positives that day, really.
Steven Gerrard scored.
So yeah, it was, and then you had a bit of a crazy situation that summer where it was like, well, if you can have Benteke, but you've got to take Firmino, and just trade-offs like that. And then
it was the Colin Pascoe stuff for me. There's his best mate, almost his absolute right-hand man, and it felt as though he kind of threw his coaching staff to the wolves to buy himself one last roll of the dice or whatever.
That certainly didn't go down well, and also you just thought at the time as well that Sean O'Driscoll. I remember. He seemed like a nice enough fella, but I remember doing an interview with him, and you didn't, just after he'd arrived, really, and you just thought, you can't tell me that getting rid of Colin Pascoe and Mike Marsh and bringing in O'Driscoll, and it was Gary McAllister, wasn't it, at the time? It was. I don't think anyone could have looked at that really and thought, that'll really transform things, and so it was sad the way it went in the end, and. You think about the struggles like needing penalties to get past Carlisle in the League Cup, and there was that miserable home defeat when they were against West Ham, which I think, having spoken to people since, I think that was probably the game. I think that was back end of August. I think that was the one when FSG went, this isn't going to end well. We're going to have to look into our options, and but I think in terms of his legacy, I think you've got to appreciate where Liverpool were at when he came in. Yeah. It's the club wasn't anywhere near competing. Hadn't even been, I think, probably sixth, 8th, and 7th or something in the 3 seasons before he came in, and didn't have a huge amount of money to play with. Very good coach. Man management let him down at times, but he gave us an unbelievable season in 2013-14. What happened that summer wasn't solely down to him. And then when things went down the hill, he couldn't pull it round. But no, I hope he gets a good reception at Anfield on Saturday. I don't think there's any reason why it shouldn't be very respectful, because I think also he's never said a bad word about Liverpool since he left. He would have been incredibly hurt by the way it finished, and as disappointed as anyone. But I've got a lot of time for Rodgers. I've got to say he was great to deal with for the vast majority of his Anfield reign. Always tried to do his best for the club. In the end, it wasn't quite good enough, and Liverpool have obviously gone to an absolutely different level under the best manager in world football.
He kind of puts the groundwork in place, I think, for what Klopp's doing. And you think, obviously Klopp takes the footballing style on to levels we've never seen before, really. But like just things like playing out the goalkeeper, playing out from the back, those kind of things that were new. The fans were acclimatized. He acclimatized the fans to. So Jurgen Klopp didn't have to come in. It wasn't revolutionary in some regards, a lot of the basics. And I think I think the thing with Rodgers is I don't think anyone begrudges him success, really. I think Liverpool fans are probably looking at what he's doing at Leicester. And there's a lot of people who just naturally didn't like him. I think there's a few people who maybe saw him as a bit of a bullshitter or whatever, and maybe felt like they saw through him. But no one ever questioned his ability as a coach, as a man who had his tactical nous and what have you. Do we think? I mean, look, he's obviously he's a more mature man. He's a more experienced man. Celtic, look, Scottish football's not not what it was. You know, it's not what it was when Alex Ferguson was coming through or what have you. But just having that experience it will have made him a better man. It will have made him a better coach, and it should really come as no surprise that he's getting a tune out of Leicester at the moment.
I think when he went to Leicester, you kind of thought that's a really good fit. I think, you know, it was obviously it didn't end well for him at Celtic. With, you know, I think, you know, it kind of left a bit of a sour taste. I think the fact he didn't wait to the end of the season, although Leicester had made it abundantly clear to him it was now or never. And I think Rodgers knew that he would have to come back south of the border to really kind of restore his reputation fully, because, you know, probably a little bit unfairly, but there would people will place an asterisk next to what he did at Celtic, because, you know, it was it was, you know, it's a one-team league in many ways, or it was then. But, you know, I think he's just underlined what a good coach he is at Leicester, and I think certainly now, you know, 7 years down the line from when he arrived at Liverpool, so, you know, 46. I'm sure the other parts of the job, you know, he's better at now in terms of the man management, and, you know, I think he seems to pick his words a lot more carefully these days as well. I think, you know, he's probably learnt that sometimes you can say too much, and then especially when things don't go well, those words are then used as a stick to beat you with.